Good morning and welcome to Charlie's Corner. We are talking about Nelson Alexander and his participation in the Civil War with the 32nd Regiment, Company A in North Carolina. So let's get on with it. After the battles down in New Bern and Little Washington, they went back up north. The 32nd Regiment actually marched north into Pennsylvania. They made it all the way to Carlisle, Pennsylvania by, I think they were on their way to Martinsburg, Pennsylvania, but they made it to Carlisle and then generally got called back to Gettysburg. Because now, this is when, in 1863, July 1st through the 4th, when Gettysburg happened. And so Lee called back the troops and all mustered at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The 32nd Regiment was active at Gettysburg, lost quite a few men. And then after Gettysburg, Lee retreated his army back down to Richmond, Virginia. So let me show you the path that he took and what happened along the way. So this is Pennsylvania. Gettysburg is actually right here. Nelson Alexander's 32nd Regiment made it all the way to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It was here is where they were headed. Harrisburg, Mechanicsburg, they were headed here. They made it to Carlisle, and then Lee called them back. So they had to come back down to Gettysburg, and they met in Gettysburg. All right, from Gettysburg, after they fought there, and that was a brutal fight. They retreated back. They were retreating back south, and they met the Union like all the way down. There's all these different towns. There was the Wilderness. There was Spotsylvania Courthouse, and at Wilderness, Nelson was wounded in the neck, and then at Orange Courthouse, which is close to Spotsylvania, he was wounded in the ankle, left ankle, I believe it was. And in Spotsylvania, they lost about a third of their regiment there. They lost quite a few in Gettysburg, and I'm getting to that. By the time they made it, made it all the way back down. All the way down. Where is it? Here's Fredericksburg. They fought at Fredericksburg. Here's Orange. They would have come down this way. And there's Spotsylvania Courthouse right there. All right, and they were on their way back down to Richmond. But they made it down. Actually, let me show you. So here's Richmond, and just south of Richmond, they made it down to Petersburg. And during the winter of 1864, they spent time here defending. The Yankees came in and were surrounding Petersburg and attacking them, and they fought them off. And by then, the Confederacy, they had blockaded all the supplies, and a lot of them, just like in the Revolutionary War, a lot of them were barefoot. It was cold in the snow. They were in muddy, frozen trenches around Petersburg, defending Petersburg from the Yankees. Now, Nelson Alexander fought at Wilderness, at Spotsylvania Courthouse, Winchester, Cedar Creek, Petersburg, it was brutal. The 32nd Regiment actually took up the rear on the retreat. And so they were the ones that were between the Yankees and Lee's Confederate Army. And so all the way down, they were fighting the Yanks all the way down, taking heavy casualties. By the time they made it to Appomattox, actually, there was only 3 members of the Company A, Tyrrell County. There was only 3 members left. Out of 180, there was 3 left at the surrender. Now, some of these just left, like Nelson Alexander. In March 30th, him and 5 other guys, there was a Davenport, there was a Phelps, went with him. They left, surrendered to the Union troops. They were taken by train to Washington, D.C. and held prisoners, a prisoner of war there at Washington, D.C. And then that was only 11 days before the surrender. And then after surrender, he was forced to take an oath to the United States, and then they shipped him down to Plymouth and released him at Plymouth, North Carolina, where he went back to his farm that he had been gone. He fought from May of 1861 until March of 1865, the end of March of 1865. And so wounded twice, and pretty much formed his attitude after the war. So, a recap. 7 states seceded. Did they have a right to secede? A lot of people say no. The people of the colonies took up arms against the British. They were British subjects themselves, and they took up arms, threw off the British government because the government wasn't representing them. Nobody has any problem with that. The Declaration of Independence actually spells out what we as Americans and what humans in general, what rights they have towards the government and whether they have that right to do that. Did they have a right to overthrow the U.S. government? No. They didn't want to. They just wanted to leave. They wanted to be left alone. So there's a federal fort down in South Carolina, Fort Sumter at Charleston. Now, there were federal forts all over the established states, all right? And they were all given, the Union troops left those forts, but Lincoln ordered the soldiers to stay at Fort Sumter. I think he was trying to provoke a war because that's the only way he would be able to get those states back is at gunpoint. And so he ordered them to stay there in order to provoke a war. The people themselves, the soldiers who fought, they were fighting for their state, for their country. You know, it was just as much, they were just being patriots. They weren't fighting to enslave anybody. Just like anyone who's ever been in battle, when they're at the out there actually in battle, they're fighting to stay alive, and they're fighting to keep their brother and their relative next to them alive. All right. You know, the Confederate Army could have marched on Washington if they'd done that first thing in the war, during the first Manassas, if they had just continued, if their object was to overthrow the U.S. government, and they just continued to Washington, D.C., and take those congressmen and Abraham Lincoln himself hostage, they could have negotiated peace at that time. But they didn't want to overthrow the government. They just wanted to be left alone. They just wanted to leave. And they fought because they were in a defensive way. It was a defensive war. They were fighting the invasion of Yankees. If the Yankees hadn't been down there in those states, those southern states, if the Yankee soldiers weren't in North Carolina, we wouldn't have fired a shot at them. They wouldn't have been here to shoot at. I mean, you can form your own opinion. I got mine, and I don't give a crap. All right. So let's move on, because that's all we can do, right? Move on. No use sitting around fretting about anything. We just move on. That war is kind of a sore spot with me, and probably with a lot of Southern men. Probably feel the same way today. Probably are, it doesn't sit right. And you can justify it all you want, okay? But it was still not justified in my opinion. And I don't even know what to say anymore. We're going to move on, all right? Because I have nothing more to say about it. And y'all take care. You have a good day today. I will see you next time on Charlie's Corner. We'll talk about something else. I'm not even sure yet. I'll see. You have a good day.